Hi, I'm Dr. Michelle with some more secrets of life and death. I'm a little late because I was having some technological challenges, but here I am. And I'm going to talk today about appreciation addiction. What's that? Well, it's our desire to be liked. Of course, Facebook has really institutionalized this desire. It's made it so that it's possible for us to experience those likes all the time. Why do we want likes? I mean, you can't eat them, you can't wear them, they don't keep you warm. Why would we spend so much time on Facebook or Twitter or some other place for likes? It's not your fault. We are herd animals. Human beings are herd animals, and we are actually wired to bond. And when we get feedback, when we get responses to us that are positive, we actually get a boost of dopamine, which is a very powerful drug. And if we hug or we do even more intimate things, we get a boost of oxytocin on top of that. And both of those are chemicals. They are drugs, internal drugs, manufactured from our own body that makes us feel great. And so it's really easy to get addicted. Now, of course, it's fine if you like it. It's only a problem when that desire to get likes or to be appreciated interferes with your ability to live your purpose, to be yourself, to improve and grow and develop and share your gifts with the world. And that appreciation addiction can sometimes do that. I've been coaching leaders, change makers, entrepreneurs for over 25 years. I started out working with people around grief and loss. And in the course of doing that, I found out how many of our patterns are rooted in a significant relationship loss and the guilt associated with that loss that makes us go out and desire that approval and helps us or encourages us that addiction to getting those likes. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that. Childhood deprivation often underlies the difficulty that my clients have had of getting over a significant loss or an important loss is these early patterns. So I'm going to be focusing today on that pattern of wanting to please, also called the people pleaser. It is a very powerful pattern because throughout your life you get a lot of encouragement for doing that, for pleasing others. Almost more than any other pattern, you were encouraged to be a pleaser. Now, here are some of the what is the problem and how the dynamic of this. And as a PhD psychosocial analyst, these are some of the things that I have learned in the course of working with my clients. In the beginning, in childhood, what develops this more addictive pattern of pleasing or wanting to receive likes or appreciation comes from deprivation. Originally, we are exposed to that experience of love, and all human beings need love, particularly when we're young. Those first 3 years, we are really susceptible to rejection. We're really susceptible to any kind of minor trauma related to not feeling safe. And feeling loved and nurtured and nourished and touched and caressed and cared for is part of the biological need of this body. Even now, even as adults, we need that attention. I often have told my clients you need at least 5 hugs a day to feel good, to feel happy, to feel stable and settled and appreciated and meaningful and valuable. And if you don't get it, you start to feel disconnected. Some psychologists have done studies with sensory deprivation, and it's one of the worst punishments is to be deprived. You actually start to hallucinate if you don't get that attention. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the need to get attention. And when children don't get attention, they can develop a number of different patterns for getting that attention. The people-pleasing, of course, is this more socially acceptable pattern, but sometimes children act out or misbehave. If they can't get love one way, they'll get attention another way. We're going to focus on the pleasing. So pleasing really, it seems benign, right? It seems really like, wow, why wouldn't we want a whole world full of pleasers? The problem is that it is really not to please the other person, but to manipulate love from the other person. So you use pleasing to get what you want. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes that pleasing behavior can actually repel people. I remember one summer going out to my spiritual community for the summer, and I had been getting a lot of attention, a lot of strokes. I was feeling really good. And I got to camp and everybody was ignoring me. I mean, I would try and reach out and they would be busy or they had something else to do. And I started to feel really disconnected. And it turned out it was my own behavior that was chasing people away. That once I settled into the spiritual practices and felt content in and of myself, then people started coming back. So be aware that when you overplease, people feel like, oh, you're pleasing too much, you want something from them. So it's an interesting balance. Now, a good people pleaser has developed the capacity to know the difference, because that's what they're really trying to do, is get that attention. And if they are off, they know how to adapt, to adjust, because they've been doing it for years. They've learned to do that to get approval from their parents. They do it in school to get approval from their teachers. They do it in work to get approval from their bosses. And you could spend your whole life doing that. And you might say, well, why not? What's wrong with that? Well, besides the fact that it might actually chase people away, it does make you dependent upon the responses of others. That is, that other people are, that you put all of your sense of self-worth on other people and how they respond to you, rather than having it come from yourself. And there are a lot of people who respond through a lot of different reasons, and it might not leave you feeling very good if you don't get the response that you want. It's so much better than trying to move somebody else is to take care of your own needs. But that's sometimes we are not taught how to do that. We're taught only how to please others. And then finally, if you don't get what you want, say you've been pleasing, you've been fulfilling what people have been asking of you, and then you don't get the reward, you don't get the approval, or you don't get the attention that you expected, you can get pretty angry. That is one of the dynamics of people pleasing, is that when you don't get the strokes, the likes in return, it can really just well up this anger. It's like, I did my job, why aren't you appreciating me? And then what happens is another pattern jumps in, and it's called reject the rejector. As we push people away. And that's where the sabotaging comes in, because sometimes that anger is misplaced. Sometimes that anger gets out of control, and we can actually burn bridges. How does this operate in terms of work and relationships. Well, in the one situation, relationships, if you're a people pleaser, you are not really being yourself. You have molded yourself to please the other person. And sometimes you put your own needs and your own desires, in fact, you don't even know what your own needs or desires are. You put that on the side because you are terrified of being rejected. I had a client who was like this. She was working, she was like a workaholic. She was working all the time and she was afraid of losing her job. Not because she loved her job so much, actually she hated her job, but she was afraid that her mother would get upset if she lost her job. And so that dynamic of wanting to please her mother, and actually to her own detriment, to her own health. And in working with her, I taught her how to value her health and her well-being more than valuing the approval of her mother. And that it's a tall order because we develop these patterns over years and years. And what happens when we try to change them is fear arises. We actually get frightened at the fundamental child level of, I will not survive if I do this. I will be banished. And it is true that as human beings, we were wired to bond because we didn't survive if we were banished from our community. And so that motivation to be seen as acceptable, to be seen as belonging, is very, very powerful. But as I said, it also can hold you back from stepping into your true life purpose and making the difference you're meant to make and being yourself. And so in the love relationship, if you're not yourself, after a while, you can get pretty boring because you're, what is the word? There's no pizzazz. There's no energy. It's all the same. And it gets boring after a while. I had a client who was a pleaser, and she pleased her husband, and she moved to some different state that she didn't even want to be there. She left her friends and family to be with him. And he, over the years that they were there, he got involved with another woman. Now, to his credit, he didn't get involved romantically, but it was an intellectual relationship. And his wife, my client, was furious at him. And she went from people-pleasing to trying to control him. And she was not successful, but she would criticize him and she would rage at him and she would do all these techniques to try and get him to give up his relationship. And what he eventually did was he died of a heart attack. His heart was broken because he was not able to choose between the two. Now, had she come to me earlier, I would have gotten her to change her behavior early on. I actually did work with another client who was terrified that her husband was going to leave her. And she had a desire to develop a business as a healer. And I focused her on that. And as she became more empowered, her husband actually got interested in her again. It's when we're that pleaser and we suck on the other person, our partner, for all of our attention, all of our love needs, for our support and everything, that we can actually drain them. So that's one of the problems with the people pleaser and how it can sabotage you. Is that if you developed this pattern as a very young child, you might not even know what it is who your authentic self is. Who are you? And, how do you even know what it is that you want? For years, I had no idea because I couldn't even go to a restaurant and order a meal because I would look at what everybody else ordered and order what they ordered because I didn't trust my own decisions. And that's one of the downsides of being addicted to that approval. Well, if I order what other people will order, order, then they will approve of me, right? That makes sense. If we're like the other people, then we won't be seen as weird. Ultimately, though, you have to learn what it is that you like, what it is that makes your life good. And as you start to do that, you actually change, you actually feel better. Another problem with this addiction to pleasing is when you have a conflict. That is, you have two different people asking for two different things at the same time. And you try and decide, well, do I please this person or do I please that person? Never thinking for one moment what it is that you want, because it's not even on your radar. And so you choose, and whatever you choose, you lose, because the other person's going to be pissed off at you. When you choose from yourself, from what you want, then you can stand in your power. And you can say, well, this is really what I want, what I need. Another aspect of the pleasing pattern or the approval pattern is blaming others. Now, I already mentioned this, that you get really angry at people if they don't give you what you want. And so if things don't work out, you can blame the other person. Like, here's a really, really common dynamic with your lover or your relationship. He asks you where you want to go to for dinner or what you want to do for the evening. And you say, oh, I don't know, you choose. And if it doesn't turn out, then you're not responsible. You don't get blamed. You put the blame on him. And if he doesn't like it, well, that's his fault. Ultimately, you need to learn to find out what it is that you like, because what men like is to please you, is to feel that they know how to make you happy. And if you put it on them and then maybe you don't like it, then that makes them feel very disempowered. So another problem with this desire for likes or approval is that you can attract energy vampires. You know what energy vampires are? They are people who really have like a radar for people who are pleasers. And they go to them to get their energy. And you give and they take, and you give and they take, and they never give back, because that's not their job. Their job is actually to wake you up and say, stop doing this, because you are going to deplete yourself. And oftentimes they're like a pattern, they're like a match to your own pleasing, that they are miserable, pathetic, victims, they blame everybody, they try to get you to give to them through guilt. So if somebody's guilting you to get you to give, that's a really good sign that maybe you're falling into that energy vampire trap. Another aspect of the affirmation addiction is being super sensitive to slights. People pleasers have developed a very highly sensitive awareness of other people and whether they like you or not to get what you need. But the slightest slight can send you down the rabbit hole of feeling worthless, unworthy, unwanted, and rejected, and then a flare-up of anger or reject the rejector. And this can really sabotage not only your relationship, but your business. You may overreact. You may think that the person's response has to do with you when actually it has to do with them having a bad day or something else going on. So you actually need to develop a certain amount of emotional intelligence. So another aspect of this is you externalize the success in your life on other people. That is, that you are powerless and they are going to give you what you need. So I had another client, and she was dependent on her husband for her livelihood and for her love and for approval. And that's a lot to put on a person. And his health was starting to fail. And what we have been working on is empowering her. because the more she is empowered, the more she feels that she can actually take care of herself, the less she drains him. I mean, I can't tell you how many women have come to me from the loss of husbands, and I can see the pattern that they, as children, had been denied enough love or were really heavily criticized by their fathers, and so they treat their husbands as the solution, and they literally, in some ways, maybe they become energy vampires and they drink them dry. The other way is that when you're taking so much from another person and they really do love you, sometimes the only way out, if they can't leave, is to die. Okay, this is an extreme example, but it's worth thinking about. How are you asking for too much from your partner? Also, in business, if you externalize the success to others, then you leave yourself being powerless. If you externalize your success to the next client or the next job gig or the next boss, then you're putting all your power out there. And I understand this. I did this for years and years. I was so addicted to approval that I only took jobs where my bosses needed me more than I needed them. And this could have gone on for the rest of my life, except that my husband left me, my first husband, and then my parents died. And those two things got me to seek help and work on my early childhood wounds and to shift my attention away from pleasing others to actually fulfilling my purpose. So that's what I invite you to do, is to start thinking about what it is that you really need to do in your life. So another aspect of this addiction is that you play small because it's safe. You play small, you play in the arena that you know, and it's boring. It's really boring. It's not satisfying. And at the end of your life, if you have not been playing full out, you have a lot of regrets. The number one regret of the dying, according to best-selling author, hospice nurse Bronnie Ware, is not living a life true to yourself. So that's another aspect. The people-pleasing, because you're afraid if you're really who you are, if you really play big, that you're going to get rejected. And you can be. You very well might be rejected by some of your family members who want to keep you in the place where you are because it's comfortable, because it's known, because it's safe. And when you start reaching out, when you start expanding yourself, they might feel bad. They might feel inadequate. So one of my coaches talked about the crabs in a bucket. If you put a bunch of crabs in the bucket and one of the crabs tries to crawl out of the bucket, the other crabs will pull that crab back into the bucket. So you want to watch out for that because they can hold you back, especially if they're used to you pleasing them. They don't want you going off and pleasing yourself when you take away all the goodies. Another aspect of this addiction and the sabotage of this addiction is sabotage. You might actually have some fear of success, that if you're successful, that you're going to lose your community. And again, you might. Some people are going to feel like you've left them behind, or that they're not good enough, or they feel embarrassed being around you. Fortunately, there are plenty of other communities out there that you can attach yourself to that will support you, but you actually need to take action. And one of those actions is to reach out to me, if you'd like a conversation with me, to know how you can change your pleasing pattern and get more success either in business or in relationships. They are really, really very close together. And if you work on one, you will actually improve the other, especially when you work on it the way that I work on it, which is at the root level of the guilt. I mean, there are plenty of people out there who are very successful in business, or they're very successful in their art, and they have an audience and they feel great as long as the audience is approving of them. But if the approval stops, they can really get into major depression. And oftentimes, when they're putting all of their attention out on pleasing their audience, they can really neglect their private, intimate relationships. And there is sometimes a fear of intimacy. Where does that fear come from? Well, early childhood abandonment. That you develop a connection with, if you're a woman, with your father, if you're a man, with your mother, and somewhere along the line, some little traumatic event, which for a 3-year-old is huge, for the adult, they didn't even remember it. Your parents have no idea that you were so traumatized. And you don't trust them. So that happened to me. My father and I bonded when I was very young, and then he was transferred to Japan because he was in the army. This was at the end of World War II. And although I saw him a few months later, for a 2-year-old, it was too long. And the bond had been broken, and I never trusted him again. I would manipulate him. I would give him what I perceived him as wanting, but I didn't trust him, and I didn't trust myself that he would love me just for who I am. I also bonded with my little sister. She was 2 years older than me, and children, they are notoriously, conditional lovers. They give you attention based on what you give them. And so that dynamic of pleasing can really develop. So another way in which this shows up, if you're a coach and you are addicted to that pleasing, it's really hard to close enrollment calls, because you want to please the person on the other side. You don't want to be rejected. So they don't want you to feel bad. They won't tell you no because they don't want to reject you, because they feel that energy coming out from you. Don't reject me, don't reject me. So they say, well, I need to think about it. And then you never hear from them again. And so in that moment, you feel not rejected. Oh, they're going to call me back. They're going to call me back. And 2 weeks from now, just like the boyfriend who never calls back, you start to get it and it feels horrible. Much better to get them to just tell you yes or no. That takes inner work to get out of that habit of wanting the likes. The other thing that happens is you don't actually ask the people to take action. You don't even make the offer. Sometimes you're doing a presentation and you use the whole time up in giving them valuable information, and then when it comes to making a request, you forget. So I'm going to make my offer again, which is, if you would like a conversation with me, a free 15-minute conversation to find out how I work and how I can help you to overcome the guilt connected with an important relationship loss, so that you can break the habit of appreciation addiction. Not that you're ever going to get rid of it, because we are human beings, but that you can be more successful in love and work. Click on the link in the comments section and let's have a conversation. So the final thing that you do, especially in work, if you're a coach or you're an entrepreneur, is underselling your skills. Charging too little, not charging enough to really survive, because you're afraid to tell your clients that you're raising your prices because you don't want them to reject you. You don't want them to leave. And so you get stuck in this dynamic where you work way too hard and they suck off of you, and then they don't get the results because they're not committed. And meanwhile, you're barely making ends meet. That's what I would like to help you to change, to break through the 5K ceiling and to start making $10,000 a month. Or if that's not of interest to you, although I'm sure it's of interest to most of you out there, to get the love that you really want. And it's a very similar dynamic. To stop going for approval and go for a real relationship. That's when you're going to attract the right kind of person, the person who really appreciates you for who you truly are. that, I believe, is what I have to share with you today. If you would like to have a conversation, click on the link or send me a message. And in the meantime, be brilliant, and bye for now.